I'm having the president's baby. Can you please divorce him soon, old lady? The woman who called me an old lady right in front of me is just 22 years old, freshly graduated from college. She deliberately entangled herself in the arms of my husband, the president, and looked at me with a smirk, leaving me nothing but to sigh. My husband, who used to say he was busy with work and hardly ever came home, preferring to be out and about. Little did I know, that time wasn't for the sake of his employees, but for him to have affairs. I felt so sorry for the employees. When I said nothing, the woman wore a triumphant smile. Well, it must be a shock, huh? Losing a husband who earns $1 million a year to me. But you're not to blame. After all, there's a huge age difference between you and me. Of course, he'd choose me over an old lady like you. Now that I'm going to be the wife of a wealthy man, you should live within your means. I was furious with this woman who kept calling me an old lady. But something else caught my attention more. $1 million a year, whose story is that? The woman looked at me puzzled. From the way she spoke, it seemed she believed my husband made $1 million a year. When I looked at my husband, his complexion turned noticeably pale. I could imagine what my husband had told her as I gave her the biggest smile. You know what? That person is. I am Megan, 50 years old. My husband David and I, of the same age, met through a friend and got married. After our marriage, we started a company together. Despite facing many challenges, we supported each other. And now our business has grown to a point where we can employ staff. Our work has kept us busy, and we married late, so we don't have children. But we lead fulfilling lives every day. Recently, though, as we've gotten older, it's natural to feel more tired and have aches and pains. But we continue working. I could give him words of appreciation if I felt his hard work and dedication. For the company were genuine. However, I can't feel any of his hard work or dedication at all. Seeing him immediately lie on the sofa and laze around watching TV as soon as he comes home is disheartening. Even when he comes home, he only complains about this pain and that. He acts as if I should listen to him because I work less than him. Hey, beer. And so it begins again. Get it yourself. I'm working on the materials for tomorrow's meeting. My husband sighed exaggeratedly and opened the fridge. Really, does someone not know how to care for her husband? A wife should support her husband. If you just listened and were a bit more charming. In the early days of our marriage, we could afford to spend more on ourselves since we didn't have children. We would dine at upscale restaurants and go on dates, thinking we would always be happy together. Bringing work home and showing off that you're busy with work and relied upon at the company seems like you're just incompetent. And that's why you can't finish your work. And so, he irritates me with his complaints, goes to bed early, and lives as he pleases every day. Especially recently, it's evident that he's not invested in his work. He tries to look good by saying he's dedicated to his work and cares about the company more than anyone else, but it's all talk. When it's just the staff around, he becomes arrogant, assigning tasks based on preference rather than ability. The staff can't possibly complain to him. Even if I wanted to raise this issue, who would I talk to about a company president who preaches daily? It's only a matter of time before the employees break down. Although my husband claims it's out of his jurisdiction or it's a different department's issue, I can't stand by and watch the seed of unrest grow within the company. I didn't want to bring work discussions home, but it seemed the only time my husband was around and not escaping somewhere was after dinner. As I was cleaning up after dinner, I broached the subject with my husband. David, have you been a bit harsh to your subordinates lately? What are you talking about? He asked back while watching TV. It looks like you're making your subordinates do your work. My husband sighed heavily. The company's performance has been declining recently, and I'm trying to contribute by starting a new venture. Is that how you talk to someone who is thinking about the company? He muttered sarcastically. A new venture? What's that about? I haven't heard anything about it. It's because you and the other employees aren't doing anything, so I have to take action. I'm not dumping my work on them. I'm just asking for their help because there isn't enough time to work on the new venture, he said without looking at me. And then you accuse me of having a bad attitude towards my subordinates, of dumping my work on them. It's annoying to hear such complaints against someone who cares about the company. It seemed he was very upset about being called out. What you're doing is just dumping your responsibilities on them. Do you think your subordinates can just say no to you? If you're asking them, are you covering for their workload or doing anything to help? If not, they're just being overloaded with work. Yes, I get it. You're such a nag, he said, annoyed, and went to his room. After that, my irritation and that of the employees only grew with my husband, who just showed up to the company without doing any real work. When I forcefully made time to address this at the office, he would work seriously for about an hour. But then he would just go back to fiddling with his phone, not looking serious at all. The employees must have a lot they want to say, but they can't speak up because I'm his wife. I had no choice but to desperately caution my husband and try to support his subordinates. Seeing my efforts, my husband showed no signs of taking me seriously or intending to improve. We had promised to decide the company's direction together. Yet, the new ventures he repeatedly mentioned were something I had never heard of. If the performance was worsening, the priority should be to identify the causes and strategize accordingly. I was dedicating my efforts to this. But the company's performance couldn't recover because my husband was independently meddling. He wouldn't listen even when I said that launching new ventures without considering the recovery of costs and current financial capabilities was too risky. He would end all conversation with, "Don't interfere with what I'm doing for the future." Lately, he's been coming home late. When asked, he would grumpily say he was meeting with clients, which seemed too frequent. When asked about which clients, he would answer, "But it appears he was also visiting places with women, not just for meals." He would say to expense it. But I couldn't always do that for unclear details like who he went with and for what project. When confronted, he wouldn't provide specific names, only mentioning future opportunities and important clients, even saying that it should be fine as long as there's a receipt. One day, while I was out on sales visits, I saw my husband at a cafe. Maybe he was working on documents? No, knowing him, he was probably using it as an excuse to slack off from work, which was frustrating. As I approached the cafe, intending to speak to him, I noticed another shadow at his windowside table. It seemed he was sharing the table with someone. Upon closer look, it was a woman, and she seemed quite young. I didn't recognize her. She was definitely not one of our employees or from a company we deal with. Who could she be meeting with during work hours, and at such a time? Could she be the client my husband mentioned? She didn't seem like someone who would frequent a nightclub, and I wondered if someone of her age could handle such a deal. But then I shook my head. It's not good to judge someone's capabilities by their appearance or age. I realized I might have been too harsh on my husband lately, suspecting even his business meetings might be affairs due to my dwindling trust in him. However, my husband might be trying to change the company in his way. I thought it was time to have a serious talk with him after a long while. My attitude might have made it difficult for my husband to consult with me in the past. I left the scene and headed to the next sales office. After returning home, I had dinner with my husband. "Speaking of which, I saw you were out today. Was it about the new business venture? Well, something like that. He replied nonchalantly. I saw you at a cafe at noon. Was that woman a client? Were you spying on me? His voice turned noticeably irritable as he stopped eating. Spying? What are you talking about? I just thought I should greet her if she was a client. Is she scheduled to visit our office? Or is there something guilty that needs spying? He glared at me. Guilty of what? That girl was someone I was interviewing to involve in the new venture. Interview? I haven't heard about that. It was sudden. I don't need to report everything to you. Who is she? An employee? A part-timer? What employment conditions have you told her? Why do I have to explain all that? If you think there's something fishy, then keep thinking that. I don't have time for such pointless discussions. You can't make hiring decisions alone. We have enough staff, and we've decided not to hire new people this year due to budget constraints. Overturning that decision on your own, she must be quite exceptional, huh? At least tell me who she is and where she's from. He stood up from his chair, clearly bothered, and refused to even glance at me. Are you actually having an affair? I finally voiced my long-held suspicion, but he said nothing and went to his room. A few days later, during a morning meeting, my husband announced there was someone interested in visiting the company. When he opened the door with a big smile, there stood the young woman I saw at the cafe. This is a young lady who just graduated from university. Please, everyone, treat her well. She smiled in front of my husband. When I looked around, the employees seemed puzzled and looked at me, probably thinking I knew about her visit. I, for one, wasn't informed about any visit, let alone a sudden company tour. I approached my husband and the woman. You are. Your name is? Ashley. Ashley, thank you for coming. Due to a lack of communication with the staff, we were not prepared for your visit today. Could we possibly contact you to reschedule? I'm sorry for coming suddenly, she said and hid behind my husband as if she was scolded for doing nothing wrong, clutching the hem of his suit. After sending Ashley away with a reassuring word, my husband sat at his desk, visibly displeased. Can we talk for a moment? I called him into the meeting room to press him about Ashley. Listen, bringing someone in for a visit out of the blue without consulting anyone is problematic. What were you thinking, doing this without discussion? What's with you? Acting all nice to Ash and then lecturing me. It's just a company visit, don't make a fuss over it. Just a visit? What if she talks about what she saw here to someone else? We have a lot of client information here. If there's a visit, we can make arrangements so sensitive information isn't exposed. And have someone guide her. Despite my pressing him on his lack of crisis management, he remained unfazed and coolly left the meeting room. Seeing how my husband called Ash with familiarity and defended her, I grew suspicious of an affair between them. Later, when I asked my husband about Ashley, who had visited the company, he said she had graduated from university, but knew nothing beyond that and told me to drop the subject. The big talk about the new venture also ceased after Ashley's visit to the company. The pretext for seeing Ashley was probably just an excuse to meet her. And now that things are going well with Ashley, he might not care about the company anymore. I couldn't understand why he brought her to the company then. If it was just to meet outside, he didn't have to make up excuses about new ventures. A simple sales call would suffice. Moreover, bringing her to the company has made all employees aware of Ashley. I couldn't figure out what my husband wanted. Lately, he's been leaving the office at regular hours, before anyone else, and often doesn't come home until the next day. On the rare occasion he is at home, He's watching TV and drinking alcohol, visibly annoyed when I return. You're home early today. Yeah, finished my work early too. He answered reluctantly. The bath. Saying that, he went to the bathroom. I noticed his mobile phone on the table. While I was organizing groceries I bought, his phone rang. It seemed to be David's mobile ringing on the table, displaying Ashley's name. After it stopped and started ringing again, David came out of the bathroom, grabbed his mobile, and glared at me. Don't touch my mobile. Haven't you heard of privacy, you shameless woman? Saying that, he went to his room. From there, I could hear him laughing loudly about the noisy woman at home, and how he wanted to divorce me and be with Ashley instead. Accidentally stumbling upon evidence of his affair, I wondered what to do. After a while, I knocked on the door of his room, suggesting we all meet since I wanted to talk to Ashley too. Still on the call, he happily began arranging a meeting with Ashley. After hanging up, he announced he had decided to divorce me and marry Ashley, and nothing I could say would change his mind. Ashley then arrived at our house over the weekend, looking around and smirking. So this was your love nest, huh? Well, it was until now. She spoke as if the divorce was already settled, and I served her coffee at the table. David promptly brought out the divorce papers and told me to sign them. Ashley looked at me with a triumphant face, as if proud to have been chosen by my husband over me. Hey, old lady, hurry up and sign the divorce papers, will you? She taunted. Disgusted with both my husband and Ashley, I signed the divorce papers. From that day on, David stopped coming home. The call from Ashley came a bit after David stopped coming home. We got married. Out of the blue. I'm pregnant with David's child. Starting today, I'm a celeb wife. She said, laughing vulgarly on the other end. You're so upset you can't even speak, right? Well, of course. You divorced a husband with an annual income of $1 million and now your future looks bleak. Former president's wife. It's so sad I could cry. Shall I give you a little charity? After a greedy motive. Otherwise, a young woman like her wouldn't get involved with a man like him, who has no particular charm or looks. David was easily swayed by a younger woman's attention, but Ashley seemed to be mistaken. Oh, the annual income of $1 million is mine, you know? He was just the president's husband and a board member, acting all important. But now that we're divorced, he'll be removed from the board. So, forget about living the celeb wife lifestyle, you better brace yourself. After my words, Ashley fell silent on the phone. Then, after a moment, she shouted back. Huh? What are you talking about? I won't forgive you for that lie. You old hag. After hanging up on me, David soon called. What did you say to Ash? It seems Ashley confronted David about it. Since she thought you were the president, I just told her it was actually me. I also warned her that your salary would plummet now that you're no longer a board member, and that a celeb lifestyle was out of the question. My response only fueled David's anger, but I couldn't help but feel it served him right. After all, he was the one lying. I told him I would be seeking compensation and hung up. The next day, David and Ashley stormed into the company. Clearly still enraged and without regard for the eyes of the employees, Ashley marched up to me. From now on, my husband will be the president. You need to leave. She believed that by ousting me and installing David as president, they could secure $1 million salary for themselves. David, following suit, boasted confidently that the employees would follow him over me, claiming he was more competent and popular. Despite my husband's bluster, the employees only tolerated him because he was the president's husband. He hardly worked, often slacked off, and ultimately, they witnessed him cheat with a college student and go through a divorce, leading to their cold stares. Who would want to follow such a man to the top of the company? Unaware of the employees' icy gazes, my husband continued to yell at me while Ashley, getting even more carried away, kept screaming for him to quickly take over the company. Though I thought the divorce would finally rid me of them, they were still clinging on. But as president, I had a duty to protect the company and its staff. Both of you need to calm down. It's unseemly for adults to be screaming like this. And Ashley, you seem to have misunderstood. My husband isn't the president. Ashley aggressively pressed on. Huh? I don't care about that. Just give up the company. Ashley refused to back down, ready to physically confront me when an employee stepped in between us. Enough is enough. If you keep this up, we'll call the police. Led by this employee, others stepped in to support me. If you do anything to our president, you won't be forgiven. You're a nuisance. Get out. Pressed by the employee's strong stance, Ashley retreated. The moment we divorced, the attitude of the employees towards David, who had previously been timid around him, drastically changed, and he seemed surprised by this. Well, they had only been enduring it because he was my husband. Had I simply resigned to the situation, saying, "That's just the kind of husband he is," and given up on solving the problem, they wouldn't have supported me as much as they do now. What's with you all? Don't come near me. I'm the president's wife. I'll have you all fired. You know, you can't just switch the president overnight. And even if you were the president's wife, you wouldn't have the authority to manage personnel like that. Despite my words, Ashley kept screaming. Meanwhile, David stood there dumbfounded, clearly affected by the employee's disdain. Perhaps overwhelmed by Ashley's tirade, she repeated her insults, believing her envisioned future slipping away. Ignoring the stunned David, Ashley stormed out of the company. David glanced at me, then, seeing my dismissive gesture, hurriedly followed her. After evicting the troublesome duo, I apologized to each employee individually. Following that, David and Ashley's relationship deteriorated. With a child involved, David refused divorce, while Ashley demanded it, leading to heated arguments. Realizing I was still president, Ashley grew fearful, and their disputes turned to legal threats. Honestly, their squabbles and potential messy court battles didn't concern me. I'm only going to demand compensation from them. The idea that all they did to me could just be erased and forgotten, as if it never happened, is utterly ludicrous. I promptly filed for compensation, but the two of them, overwhelmed with their own affairs, lashed out at me, demanding compensation at a time like this. It's all your fault, you're to blame. My husband ranted, making no sense. To me, it sounded nothing more than the howling of a defeated dog. After involving a lawyer, David quickly agreed to pay the compensation. His tough act crumbled when faced with legal action, revealing his true cowardice. After a lengthy back and forth about divorcing or not, David and Ashley finally ended up getting a divorce. What comes next is both amusing and trivial. It turns out Ashley's child wasn't David's after all. Calculating back from Ashley's childbirth, she was pregnant before meeting David, and the real father is unknown. Ashley seemed to have planned to claim it was David's child to secure child support through the divorce. Upon learning this, David and Ashley's situation got even messier. One would think it's common sense, but David had fully believed the child was his. Ashley had hoped to at least get child support from David. But since the child wasn't his and their marriage hadn't been long, it was a no-go. With no other choice, Ashley returned to her strict parents' home, who, upon learning everything, told her to leave and never come back. despite her pleas to stay for the child's sake. Reluctantly, they agreed but had no intention of restoring their trust in her, choosing instead to re-educate her from scratch. The leniency shown to Ashley, considering all she had done to me, feels too mild. Leaving her to her own devices could lead to more outrageous actions, as she seems incapable of genuine remorse. Perhaps, living under her strict parents' roof might be for the best, though it's doubtful her character will change much, ensuring a life of hardship ahead, which seems like just desserts. She tried to approach David with the lure of a lavish life, claiming the child was his, but ended up with this outcome, which is frankly laughable. After the divorce, it seems my husband moved into a new house with Ashley, opting for a luxury apartment far beyond their means, resulting in an inability to afford the rent. During his affair with Ashley, he appeared to spend a considerable amount of money on her, wearing expensive clothes and driving luxury cars to flaunt his wealth, though it turns out this money was borrowed from financial companies. Moreover, the money he borrowed was from high-interest lenders, leading to spiraling debt. When instructed by a lawyer to promptly pay compensation to me, he couldn't come up with the funds, resulting in even more debt. Harassed by debt repayments and unable to quit his job despite causing numerous problems, David, who could barely handle menial tasks, became more of a nuisance at the company, facing ever-increasing hostility until he finally resigned. David lost his home, job, wife, and everything else. When I heard he was living on the streets, I couldn't help but laugh out loud. Opening a beer can in the now peaceful home, free from anyone's orders. Imagining David's situation brought another laugh. Serves him right. Having savings, a thriving company, and no financial worries. The best part was getting the compensation from David. Thinking back on my past self, who considered enduring life with such a man, sends shivers down my spine. Finishing my beer, I felt all the fatigue and aches easing away. Without the stress David brought, both the employees and I are now working happily and more freely. Together with my loyal and supportive staff, we launched a new venture, expanding the company even further, and now I relish the fulfilling days ahead. My name is Vanessa, a 40-year-old housewife who usually works part-time at a local supermarket. I live in an apartment with my husband Brian, who is the same age as me, and my daughter Emma, who is in the 4th grade of elementary school. My husband and I have been married for 12 years. To put it bluntly, my married life has been a whirlwind. I originally worked at the same company as my husband, but resigned when we got married. I want you to stay home after we get married, he strongly requested. I didn't have a strong attachment to my job, so I agreed by saying, okay. Brian advanced in his career faster than his peers despite his age, and he earned more than them. We wouldn't be financially troubled even if I don't work. Both our parents approved of our marriage, and I got along well with my in-laws. Although my in-laws were serious and strict, they never treated me unfairly. Especially, there were no issues with my mother-in-law or other relatives for that matter. From the outside, my married life might have seemed very happy, but that was a veil hiding the truth. I had a significant problem. The reason was Cindy, my sister-in-law. She is Brian's sister, 10 years younger than him, and she has been hostile towards me from the beginning of our marriage. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that Brian doted on his younger sister, whom he adored. When we visited his parents' house for marriage greetings, his parents welcomed us and said, "Thank you for coming. Please take care of our unsophisticated son." But Cindy ignored me even when I jokingly said, "Please take care of me from now on." Brian didn't scold her for such behavior, laughing it off by saying, "Maybe she's jealous because you're taking me away." His parents said, "At least respond to the greeting properly." But she completely ignored them. At that time, I thought she was just angry because a stranger had taken her beloved brother away from her, and maybe she would come around and get along with me after a while. But that day never came. She picked fights with me whenever she could. She would barge in on weekends and stay from morning till night, finding fault with everything I did. If I served coffee and sweets, she would complain. I hate coffee. If I then prepared tea or juice, she would say, I don't like this brand. I felt awkward about her random visits, but for her it was a routine to come over while I was doing household chores, like cleaning and laundry, and criticize the way I did them. If I was doing laundry, she'd say, I hate the smell of this fabric softener. While cleaning, she would wipe dust with her finger and say, You missed a spot here, in a nagging tone. It would have been better if she only stayed for a short time in the morning. But she always stayed for dinner, drank with Brian, and left late at night. Frankly, there was no such thing as private time for us as a couple. I've asked Brian several times if Cindy could visit less often, but he dismissed it by asking, Is there a problem with my sister coming over? Wondering if he was unaware of my troubles, I explained. When Cindy comes over, I can't get my household chores done, and it's troublesome when she stays late. We can't even have time together. However, Brian replied with something nonsensical. We can always make time for us as a couple. Or are you jealous of the bond between my sister and me? After several years of this lifestyle, Cindy got married. My in-laws were relieved as if a weight had been lifted off their shoulders. I thought this would mean she'd stop coming to our house. Honestly, dealing with her was the main source of stress for me as a busy mother. As expected, her visits decreased after her marriage. About half a year into her marriage, she got pregnant. She seemed to be in poor health during her pregnancy and stayed with her parents, not visiting us. I thought we would become distant from her once the child was born, considering the busyness of parenting. However, she ended up divorcing shortly after giving birth and returned to her parents' house. The reason for her divorce, as told by Brian, was a mismatch of personalities. Frankly, her personality can only be described as brazen and selfish. The man who couldn't indulge Cindy's cute whims is to blame. Cindy was defending herself by saying, I thought he would cherish me like my brother does, but after we got married, it became all about what I should and shouldn't do, which I found annoying. She was justifying herself. However, it seemed like her parents did not take her divorce well, saying, Not long after Cindy moved back to her parents' house, my mother-in-law, who rarely calls, called me, saying, She doesn't understand that the divorce was her fault. It's truly shameful, and vented to me. Think about why you got divorced. Think about it seriously. And it wasn't long before Cindy began visiting our house again. After moving back to her parents' house, she started working after dropping off her son Max at daycare. The rule in this house is, if you're going to stay, you must work. Otherwise, you cannot stay here. Her parents had apparently told her. Why do I have to work? Brian and she complained to their parents. Isn't it cruel to make Cindy work right away when she's just been through a divorce and is hurting? When she began working, Cindy forced me to take Max to and from daycare and to pick him up when he was sick because the daycare was on the way to my part-time job at the supermarket. Please take care of Max again today. This is rather difficult, Cindy. I'm busy too, and as his mother, you should be the one dropping and picking him up. I'm busy with work. Don't compare me to you, who has it easy working part-time. How many times have we had this exchange in the morning rush at the doorstep? Then, Brian would come out and say, Just take him already. Cindy is having a hard time, isn't she? And I would end up taking care of Max. Since the daycare was in the opposite direction of his company, Brian couldn't do the drop-off and pick-up, so it ended up being my daily responsibility. To make matters worse, Cindy had registered my mobile phone number and work number as emergency contacts at the daycare, so I was the one they called if anything happened. Max has a fever, please come and pick him up. They would say, and I had to apologize to my colleagues and leave early numerous times. Fortunately, many of my colleagues had parenting experience and understood that kids get sick often, and they accepted my leave graciously. Yet, even when I contacted Cindy, she would not respond, claiming she was busy at work. Cindy would only say, "You take care of it." But it's not like she had no interest in Max. "I'm practicing non-punitive parenting," she claimed, adoring him instead. When Max misbehaved and I said, "You shouldn't do that," she would snap at me, saying, "Hey, what are you doing to Max? I told you I'm practicing non-punitive parenting," and refused to scold him for anything. Feeling that this was not right, I consulted Brian. Knowing she wouldn't listen to me, I hoped Brian would talk to her. "Brian, Max's mischief is getting out of hand. Even if she is practicing non-punitive parenting, isn't this going too far? What's wrong with non-punitive parenting? I support it. If we keep scolding him, he'll become timid and won't grow up freely." Brian dismissed my concerns. As a result, by the time Max was ready for kindergarten, he had become quite a handful. If something didn't go his way, he would cry and scream. He would lie on the floor, kicking his legs and arms, to assert himself. Even seeing this, Cindy would interpret it positively, saying, "My child is sensitive and honest." Brian would also miss the point, saying, "He's a boy, it's good that he's energetic," leaving me utterly dismayed. Honestly, I had considered divorce, but Brian was a good provider for the family and didn't go out much. The only downside was his nonsensical talk when it came to Cindy, but I thought, he's still Emma's father. And time just passed. But an incident finally pushed me to my limit. One day, Cindy came to our house crying. "Dad and Mom told me to leave the house." What? Why would Dad and Mom say such a terrible thing to my little Cindy? Brian was shocked by her words. But there was a reason Cindy was asked to leave. Sometimes, I would hear complaints from my mother-in-law because Cindy was too comfortable having her parents around who held her accountable to her daily tasks and work. She struggled to do it herself when she was away from her parents. However, due to her selfish nature, she kept causing trouble at work, quitting, and then finding new jobs repeatedly. 3 months ago, she caused trouble at work again and quit. Before then, she would find a new job within about 2 weeks, but this time, she hadn't even started job hunting, saying she was a bit tired. It was clear that her parents were running out of patience with her lack of effort. "Brian, what should I do? I'll be in trouble if they kick me out." "Well, let me talk to Mom and Dad." "Just wait a bit." Brian did talk to his parents, but their decision was final. Really, why won't Mom and Dad help Cindy when she's in trouble? Brian vented his frustrations about his parents to me when he got home. "Well, it's because she shows no signs of wanting to look for a job when she needs one." When I said that, he replied, "You're so cold. It seems I'm the only one on Cindy's side." And sighed deeply. Then, he did something unbelievable. A few days later, when I returned home from my part-time job, there were lots of cardboard boxes at our home. Wondering what they were, I hurriedly checked the labels and saw they were in Cindy's name. To my disbelief, Brian came back with Cindy and her son, Max. "What's all this? Whose are these boxes?" To my question, Brian proudly declared, "From today, we're taking care of these two. We're going to support them completely. We've cut ties with the parents." I thought I was going to black out. The idea of living together with Cindy and Max was unthinkable, and I felt a strong refusal bubbling up inside me. As I remained silent, Brian added, "Cindy's really hurt because she's been kicked out of the house. Just take good care of her, okay? Thanks for having us. I'd like pizza for dinner today as a moving-in celebration. Please order some. I definitely want pepperoni if it's pizza." "Oh, Max wants pepperoni. Did you hear that? Make sure to get pepperoni because my child wants it. Come on, place the order. Cindy's asking for it." Stunned by Brian's words, I snapped back to reality and blurted out, Okay, let's get a divorce then. Huh? Divorce? Brian was taken aback by my statement. If living with Cindy is the plan, I'd rather divorce you right now. After I firmly stated this, Brian got angry and yelled, I've always thought you didn't care about Cindy. I don't need a wife who can't cherish my sister. Get out. I realized then that Brian valued his sister more than us. Fine, I don't care about Cindy. I'll take Emma and leave. Do whatever you want. He then went inside with Cindy and her son. As we passed by, I heard Cindy giggling. Poor thing, getting kicked out by her own brother. I quickly packed up and left with my daughter. Emma looked puzzled but followed me after seeing the situation with Brian and Cindy. Fortunately, my parents' house was just one train stop away, so we could return home quickly. My parents were shocked by our sudden arrival but became furious after hearing the story and advised me to divorce Brian. When I asked Emma, Is it okay if we divorce Daddy? She replied, Yes, I like you more than Daddy. And surprisingly, she agreed quite easily. Eventually, we divorced through a lawyer. Brian paid the agreed upon amount for compensation and child support in a lump sum, avoiding any direct contact, likely not wanting to see my face again. Once, my in-laws came to apologize for their children's terrible behavior. Seeing my elderly in-laws apologizing profusely was heart-wrenching, and I couldn't help but feel sorry for them. About 3 months after returning to my parents' home, my ex-husband suddenly reached out to me. What do you want now? When I spoke coldly, he pleaded with me in almost tears. Please, come back to me, let's get back together. I retorted, No. You should be happy with your beloved Cindy. Don't say that. I'm sick of Cindy now. Despite his previous adoration for Cindy, I wasn't surprised. Cindy still isn't looking for a job, and she doesn't do anything around the house. Well, it's not that she doesn't do it, she can't. And she keeps asking for this and that. Yes, she's always been brazen. I heard from my mother-in-law that Cindy couldn't do any household chores. Apparently, when she was young and her mother tried to teach her, Brian would intervene, saying, Don't make Cindy do such things. Cindy grew up without learning any household skills, which led to her not doing any housework even after marriage. This lack of effort definitely contributed to her husband growing tired of her, a story I heard from my in-laws. Of course, Cindy never mentioned any of this to Brian. Cindy always had a habit of demanding things. She would pester me endlessly for clothes and handbags she liked. I felt no sympathy for Brian. He was merely experiencing the boundless whims which I had endured. All along, Brian deemed Cindy's whims cute because it was always others who bore the brunt of her demands. I've been putting up with Cindy's whims all along. I feel bad about that. So, won't you come back home? If you say you'll kick Cindy out, I might consider it. But Brian still defended Cindy. Why should Cindy have to leave? That would be cruel. I felt there was no hope. You always put Cindy first. If I returned, I'd just end up dealing with her whims again, reducing your burden. No one said that. It's the same thing. As long as Cindy is there, my burden won't lessen. I've been complaining about her whims causing trouble, but you ignored it. Well, You've made your bed, now lie in it. It's no longer my concern. Wait. No. If you keep pestering me, I'll have a lawyer issue a restraining order. But I hung up, cutting him off. He was just as self-centered as Cindy. Feeling any residual love faded, I decided to ensure Brian couldn't contact me again by reaching out to my in-laws and a lawyer. Since then, I have maintained a good relationship with my in-laws, who are wonderful grandparents to my daughter. I learned that Cindy was forced to work after being caught fraudulently claiming single mother benefits and now had to repay the money. Cindy's work stress led to constant arguments with Brian. Brian unsuccessfully tried to reconcile with his parents, but they reminded him, You were the one who wanted to cut ties. Brian tried to reconcile with me a few times, but I ignored him. Recently, I got a promotion interview at the supermarket where I worked, moving from part-time to full-time employment. With a better salary and benefits, my daughter and I began saving for our own place. We plan to move out soon, ready to face the future together, just the two of us. You stay here. Her eyes wide open, her mouth painted bright red and gaping as she shouts angrily. Suddenly feeling anxious, I desperately asked questions to try and suppress this feeling. Where is this place? Did you come to play at this house? You're going with me, right? However, the woman, glaring down at me, shouted, "Shut up." Meanwhile, a man looks on emotionlessly, his eyes pitch black, hidden in the shadows. These unemotional two are my parents. 30 years ago, when I was just 6 years old, my parents abandoned me. On that day, they suddenly took me to an unfamiliar land, in front of an unknown house. Just minutes before, I had been excited about my first outing with my parents. As I pushed the intercom, my mother turned her back as if to flee and headed towards the car. Realizing instantly that I was being left behind, I clung desperately to my mother's arm, shouting, "Wait. I'm coming with you." But she shook me off as if I were something filthy. Without even a glance at me, struggling on the ground, unable to stand, my mother got into the car and drove off. The smell of the car's exhaust gas intensely stung my nose. Trying to chase after the car, I struggled to stand up, but it was difficult for me, born with only one leg. While I struggled to get up, the car quickly disappeared out of sight. I trembled with fear, unable to move. I struggled to breathe. I wanted to go home. Where is this place? That was the last memory I had with my parents when I was 6 years old. 30 years have passed, and I haven't seen my parents. I don't intend to see them. Protecting this life I have now is what matters most. If it's for protecting our family's peaceful life, I can do anything. I'll make myself so happy that I can completely forget about that day. I am Ashley. Born without a right leg, but I have been able to live happily for 36 years. I can do the job I love, and every day is very fulfilling. This is all thanks to my grandfather. I am not grateful to my parents at all, because they abandoned me. My mother called me a monster. I have little memory of my childhood, but what I occasionally remember is the sight of my mother's back. Was it inside the house? Or was it a dimly lit room where a bright red curtain slightly swayed in the breeze by the window? I was lying on the floor. Thirsty, I tried to go to the faucet to drink water and lost my balance and fell. As I collapsed, my cane rolled away. At that time, I couldn't put on my prosthetic leg by myself. So when I was at home, I used a cane to balance and move around. Since I didn't have much strength in my arms yet, I couldn't stand up and desperately wanted my mother to pick up the cane for me. However, she turned her back and didn't even look at my hand reaching out for help. It was unbearable for her that her daughter was not like other children. At that time, I believed it was my fault that I wasn't loved. My father was hardly ever at home, so I have even less memory of him. Occasionally, when he was home, he acted as if I were invisible. Even if I was struggling to get up the stairs or reach the faucet, he would just walk past me or sit watching TV in the living room. He was indifferent to me. When I drew a picture of him and said, "Look, I drew Daddy," he would just respond, Whether I asked him to eat with me or showed him something, it was always just, I don't remember him ever making eye contact. In my memories, his eyes are always pitch black. My father's indifference must have influenced my mother's feelings towards me, at least to some extent. In a household where my existence was largely ignored, and just as I was about to start elementary school, my mother told me, "Ashley, we're going out today." I had never attended kindergarten or daycare, and outings were minimal. So the three of us had never gone out together. "Take this because we're going far," she said, handing me a bag with a few clothes. Until then, she had been concerned about my appearance and never even took me to the park. So when she mentioned going on a long trip for the first time, I was thrilled and filled with anticipation about where we were going. "Where are we going?" I asked, but my parents didn't answer. However, I was so captivated by the changing scenery outside the car window that I didn't mind not knowing our destination. From the back seat, I couldn't see my parents' faces, but I remember seeing my father's stubble in the rearview mirror as he drove. I don't know how long we drove, but eventually, the car stopped. "We're getting out here," they said, and as the door opened and I got out, there was an old house. "Bye," then, my mother said, which suddenly made me anxious. I quickly asked, "Aren't you coming with me, Mom?" "Dad, where is this place? Are you and Mom going somewhere?" However, as usual, my father averted his gaze from me, and my mother only said, "It's all arranged." When I rang the doorbell of the house, my parents got back in the car and drove off before the house's occupants could come out. I stood there dumbfounded, staring at my departing parents' car, completely unable to understand what was happening to me. Where is this place? What is this house? Why was I brought here? I was paralyzed with anxiety, fear, and a sense of loss when the front door opened with a click. "Hello, who is it?" said a face I recognized as it appeared. It was my grandfather. Since my mother was concerned about my appearance and didn't take me out, I had never been to this house before. But I remembered my grandparents well because they had visited my home. It was because the warmth and kindness I felt from my grandparents at that time was the first human warmth I had ever experienced. I have strong memories of feeling cherished by someone. "What's wrong, Ashley? Where are your parents?" The moment I heard my grandfather's voice, I couldn't stop crying. Grandfather looked around, seemed to sense something, and gently embraced me. It was only with the warmth of his hands that I could finally express my feelings. "Mom," she drove away in the car. "I want to go home. It hurts." Seeing my pain, my grandfather's face saddened, and he hugged me tightly and stroked my head. "It's still cold outside, Ashley. Let's go inside." He gently took my hand and led me into the house. I still remember the warmth from his large hands. It's okay," he said, almost as if reassuring himself. My grandfather made me a warm drink. I remember feeling my body warm up from the core and the tension in my muscles relax. "Is this all your luggage?" my grandfather asked, which made me wonder briefly if I couldn't go home. However, at that moment, the warmth inside the house and the gentle voices of my grandparents gradually calmed me down. I fell asleep that night between my grandparents, who stroked my forehead, and slept until nearly noon the next day. From that day on, I lived with my grandparents. A few days later, I was surprised to hear my grandfather raise his voice on the phone for the first time. "Are you even a mother?" After hanging up, he told my grandmother. Imagine how sad Ashley would be if she knew her parents had abandoned her. From the tone of his voice, it seemed like my grandfather was on the verge of tears. So I quietly went into the room they had prepared for me. I had a vague feeling about it, but at that moment, I fully realized that I had been abandoned by my parents. Since then, enveloped in my grandparents' kindness, I was gradually able to forget the sadness of being abandoned. Warm meals, warm words, and a warm room in the house made me feel truly happy for the first time. My grandparents cherished me and supported me all the way to university. They participated in school events and watched me strive. and enjoy myself with gentle smiles as if it were their own happiness. My grandparents are my pride. High school and university were a bit far from my grandparents' home, and they were over 60 years old, so even though I said, "You don't have to push yourselves," they always came to see me perform, saying, "Ashley's big day, we're going to see it. We want to see it ourselves." To me, my grandparents were like my real parents. There are no parents for me other than my grandparents who cherish me more than anyone. I owe my grandparents an unpayable debt. I had decided that when I became an adult, I would definitely repay this kindness. After graduating from university and receiving my first salary, I prepared a meal and a gift. "This is such a fancy restaurant. It's my first time here," my grandparents said with a shy smile, which made me overwhelmingly happy, and tears came to my eyes. When I toasted with my grandfather, he said with blushing cheeks, "To think I'd get to drink with Ashley, what a happiness. Thank you for letting me go to university. I was never lonely because you were always there with me. And I was so happy you always participated in the events," I told them. To which my grandfather responded with a big wave of his hand in front of his face. "Ashley's smile is our source of energy. We did it because we loved to," he said, hiding his embarrassment. His eyes seemed a little teary at that moment. When I handed over the teacups I had prepared as a gift, he said while laughing, "To think Ashley bought these with the money she worked hard to earn, it feels too precious to use." He held the teacups and stared at them for a long time. It has been 30 years since my parents abandoned me. It has been 30 years since I started living with my grandparents and became a family of 3. Since becoming a working adult, I have been working desperately to repay my grandparents, even if it meant cutting back on sleep and having no free time. Working towards my goals never felt too hard. In my 20s and 30s, I put all my effort into my job. I took any job that would make money. Instead of spending on my own entertainment, I saved. And this year, I finally achieved my goal of buying a high-rise apartment near a station. That is convenient for my elderly grandparents to live in. Life in the high-rise seems to satisfy my grandparents, and we are able to live a peaceful life every day. One day, as I was thinking about what else could make my grandparents happy, something unexpected happened. On a holiday morning, while drinking coffee with my grandparents in the living room, the doorbell rang. The monitor showed a middle-aged couple. I had no idea who they were, but my grandfather looked at the monitor and showed his anger. "What are you doing here now?" After hearing his voice, I looked at the monitor again. Those eyes. I remember them. They always turned their backs on me, but when angry, my mother's eyes would widen and glare, and my father with his black eyes. "Go away. We have nothing to talk about with you." After saying this, my grandfather turned off the intercom and went into his room. But the parents shown on the monitor did not seem to be leaving. Ding dong, ding dong, ding dong. The chime was pressed over and over again, and I could see the suspicious eyes of other residents of the apartment in the monitor. Thinking that this would bother other residents, I decided to respond. "There is nothing to discuss, so please leave." Despite my firm statement, my mother did not back down. She stared intently at the monitor. Her big red mouth looked as if it could swallow a person. Next to her, my father, with his pitch-black eyes, was muttering something, but I couldn't hear what. "I won't go back until we talk. Let me into the house now." In the entrance, without caring about the public eye, my mother yelled, "Anyway, there's nothing to discuss. Really. If you moved to such an apartment, you should have contacted us properly. If I hadn't heard from Danny, I wouldn't even know where the family home is." The tone of her complaint was something I recognized. Danny is my grandmother's brother. My grandmother had 2 siblings. and I had given him the new address as a contact for emergencies. I hadn't told Danny in detail that I had been abandoned by my parents because he lived near my parents' home. I refrained from discussing the situation to ensure that no harm would come to Danny. Really. I had to pretend to be Danny's niece on the phone to get this info. He's so hard of hearing. He didn't even realize it was me and blabbed about how you're living in such a nice place now. And how happy that must be. Laughing out loud while talking about how she deceived someone. My mother seemed to have lost her sense of decency as a person. If you're earning enough to live in such an apartment, you should give us some money, she said to me as if it was the most natural thing. When I responded, I cannot give you money, her expression changed drastically. What? What did you just say? Who do you think raised you? She exclaimed in anger. So I told her, my grandparents raised me. Then she cursed me, you ungrateful thing. How hard it was to raise someone with a body like yours. Pay back the money it took to raise you until you grew up. It's only natural to repay your parents. She pressed on, to which I replied, I don't remember being raised by you and Dad. My real parents are my grandparents, and I refused her demands for money. Hearing her continue to rant through the intercom, my grandfather came out from the back room. What is all this noise about? I told you to leave. Grandfather shouted at her. When Mother yelled back, we raised this child, so she should repay us. The usually gentle face of my grandfather filled with an anger I had never seen before. You raised her? Don't you remember what you did to this child 30 years ago? You abandoned this little child in an unknown land. Have you ever thought about how she felt at that time? When I held Ashley, she was trembling. How lonely she was. How scared she was. How anxious she was. Then Mother said, but thanks to that, she grew up well enough to earn so much. It was all thanks to us. And your grandparents weren't lonely because of it. So she should be grateful. She rambled on with nonsensical excuses. Grandfather sighed in disgust. Do you still not realize that you are tormenting yourself with the seeds you've sown? When we found out you were pregnant, we told you to quit drinking and smoking for the baby's sake, but you didn't listen. After Ashley was born, you continued to drown in alcohol and cigarettes. When we went to see Ashley and held her because she was so adorable, even Ashley smelled of cigarettes because you smoked that much. As my mother moved, the smell of cigarettes wafted from her. And with it, memories of my childhood home began to emerge. The smell of my mother's cigarette smoke mingled with the breeze that fluttered the red curtains. Turning around, I saw the glowing tip of her cigarette in her mouth, brightening with each breath she took. As I tried to walk, I stumbled over multiple cans and bottles of alcohol and fell. The pink carpet turned red as it soaked up the spilled alcohol. It was like a sea of blood. When the alcohol spilled, my mother's eyes widened and bloodshot as she yelled furiously, throwing a can at me. My father was indifferent, even as I was hit by the can and grabbed by the hair. He sat in the dim living room, piling more cigarette butts onto an already heaping ashtray. Behind him, gray smoke filled the air. Occasionally, ashes fell from the overflowing ashtray. As these memories resurfaced, and my parents' faces became clear in my mind, I felt nauseous. What's the big deal? There are plenty of people who smoke and drink. Why am I the only one you blame? Mother wouldn't back down. Yes, there are many people like that. But, you often neglected to take care of Ashley because you were drunk. You wouldn't notice when Ashley fell because you were asleep. And you often didn't feed her when she was hungry. Ashley was always bruised. And it was so bad that neighbors worried and even reported it, you know? We had to move because of the rumors, even though she wasn't taken into protective custody. Mother couldn't find words to argue and instead belligerently demanded, "Just let me in anyway." It's ridiculous to have a conversation like this without even showing your face. Standing at the entrance. At that moment, a police officer appeared from behind. "What's going on here?" "We received a report of a suspicious person and arguing voices from a resident here." Mother, trying to play it off as a family dispute, said, "It's fine, it's just a family matter." But my grandfather stated, "She is trying to extort money from us. Please take her away." The officer seemed unsure of how to handle the situation. Mother was determined not to back down until I gave her money. Thinking that this could endanger my elderly grandparents, I also spoke up to the officer. "I am being subjected to financial extortion. I am this child's mother," she asserted loudly. "She is indeed my biological mother, but since she abandoned me 30 years ago, the parent-child relationship has been severed," I replied. "I was explaining that you are not a resident here, and that your presence is causing a disturbance to the residents, so I asked you to leave." Despite my calm explanation, my mother could not contain her anger and screamed loudly in front of the police officer. "This ungrateful monster of a daughter. You should be grateful just for being born. With that appearance, living in such a place. If you come out, I won't hold back." Mother began to kick the automatic doors of the entrance violently. Seeing her rampage, a police officer intervened, and my father muttered quietly, "Please, spare us." The police then subdued my rampaging mother, saying, "Calm down. Let's go to the station." I could see her being taken away by the police, reluctantly. From behind my forcibly removed mother, my father's figure appeared smaller than before as he shuffled along, shoulders hunched and hands fidgeting weakly. Later, I received a call from the police, explaining my parents' situation. After abandoning me, they attempted to start an online shop. But with my father's background only in clerical work and my mother's dislike of work, they lacked the skills to manage or sell effectively and failed miserably. They had accumulated a significant amount of debt and tried to get financial help from me, their daughter. It seemed that they were only warned by the police at that time, but they soon came to visit again. They watched our apartment from a park across the street all night, saying, "We've waited all night, let us in, and give us the money, and we'll leave." There were also letters stuffed in. "Pay up. Deposit money into this account. Don't forget the favor of being born. You really aren't worth living." Eventually, they even resorted to blackmail-like tactics, demanding I sign as a guarantor for their debts, prompting me to consult a lawyer I knew. The lawyer said I could sue for threats and emotional abuse. He prepared official documents to send to my parents. "Do not approach our family at all. Do not request money. If these conditions are not met, we will sue legally and demand compensation." I wasn't interested in the compensation, I just wanted to keep my parents away immediately. That's why the document included the possibility of demanding compensation. This strategy was effective against my financially struggling parents, and they stopped coming to our apartment. I was able to focus on my work peacefully. I am a writer, and my unique experiences and perspectives, shaped by my disability and the treatment by my parents, enable me to excel in my field. Most importantly, the immense love I received from my grandparents is a major source of inspiration in my writing, especially in children's literature, conveying the warmth and kindness of people. My children's books are pioneering a new genre, recently becoming a topic of discussion. Therefore, I have been asked to appear in the media as Ashley, increasing my public appearances. I don't use social media myself, but in recent times, celebrities' pasts are often revealed online without their control. Likewise, the fact that I was abandoned by my parents and raised by my grandparents became widely known without my consent. While I have come to terms with my past, the public reaction to this revelation has led to significant criticism of my parents. Burdened by their debts, they were forced to work day and night, leading a hellish life. However, their workplace was local, and it quickly became known that they were my parents. The public scrutiny and criticism were intense, and they faced discrimination at work, making their employment untenable. As the attention on me increased, so did the criticism towards my parents, eventually leading to their dismissal from work under contrived reasons. Completely unable to make ends meet, they attempted to visit me again. I was unaware of their visit because they were stopped at the entrance of my high-rise apartment by the security guard. Just as famous as I am, my parents were recognizable to anyone as my parents. Therefore, they were identified immediately by the security staff. "What's wrong with a mother wanting to see her daughter?" my mother shouted. But the security guard decisively replied, "There is no need to let you in." In fact, after the previous disturbance, I had already informed the security company not to let my parents through. I wanted to avoid any danger to my elderly grandparents. With no worry of my parents visiting, we could live very peacefully. Since then, my parents, unable to live in areas where they were known, disappeared into a place where no one knew them. However, cornered and without any reserves, they blamed each other for their situation, fighting and demeaning each other daily. Rumors suggest that even my father has succumbed to drinking and smoking, and both have engaged in gambling. Addicted to gambling, they couldn't even pay off their debts and were constantly on the run from dangerous people. Meanwhile, I continue to write novels quietly in my room in the high-rise apartment, surrounded by numerous photos of my grandparents. In this room, I feel the comfort of being enveloped in their kind smiles. Countless photos of my grandparents, who always attended my school events because they wanted to see Ashley's efforts, inspire me. I strived because I wanted to see their smiles. Their smiles are my motivation. And my next publication is a work I am confident about because it is inspired by my beloved grandfather. It features a hot-blooded hero, much like my warm-hearted grandfather. Once this book is completed, I plan to go on a trip with my grandparents. I always infuse my work with the warmth of my grandparents. And when the work is complete, it becomes another way to repay my grandparents, which is also a reward for myself. Though my grandparents are aging, they're still very active, going out for walks daily and having coffee with neighbors. I hope to continue living a peaceful life with them for a long time. I'm going to divorce a sick, poor person and live for myself and my new family from now on. Eric said what he wanted to say and stood up satisfied. But I didn't understand what he meant, so I asked him again. To that, Eric pushed a crumpled divorce paper at me. I was furious, but strangely calm. "The only good thing about you is that you're understanding." However, I suppressed my anger and wrote the divorce papers for him, and that's what Eric said. I'm not strangely sad about the divorce. I'm finally free from Eric. But that's separate from the anger. I can't forgive this betrayal, and on the day of my discharge from the hospital, I was going to do something. My name is Jenny Hansen. I married Eric, who is 4 years younger, and this year marks our 30th anniversary. We got married young, Eric at 20 and I at 24. In what's called a shotgun marriage because I got pregnant with our eldest son, Aaron. It's not so unusual now, but back then, getting pregnant before marriage wasn't common. And we were mocked by friends for our lack of planning. But I loved Aaron very much and did not regret marrying. Then we were blessed with our daughter Stacy, and we worked hard for our children. Although we were poor. However, I wasn't very physically robust to begin with. I hurt my back during my second pregnancy and suffered from severe back pain. I also had chronic asthma, so I wasn't able to work properly. It ended up being mostly Eric earning. But I occasionally worked part-time and managed our family of 4 with the money I had saved from my single days. But Eric constantly complained about our situation. We're poor because you can't work. I didn't talk back when he said that, I just endured it. Eric's salary, my part-time income, and my savings. I bore a bigger burden, but I thought it was wrong to say that because we were family. So I apologized. I'm sorry. I'm trying to save on groceries. We're poor because of you, so get your parents to do something about it. True to his words, I had borrowed money from my parents. I felt pathetic, but my parents lent me money without asking any questions. But Eric, knowing this, never once thanked my parents. Derek is working hard outside, so you mustn't forget to appreciate that. Honestly, I was angry at times. But I protected my family in my own way with my mother's words and love. However, Eric was not a deeply affectionate father to the children. Eric became a father around 20. His peers were out playing every day. He seemed to have no sense of responsibility because he had a young family. At home and played as if he were single. He often went out drinking with friends after work. Meanwhile, I bathed our 2 young children with my aching back. Eric complained about our tight finances. But he didn't help with saving and was the one spending money. Of course, I had complaints. But if enduring myself meant happiness and harmony for my family, there was no need to stir up trouble. That's how we managed as a couple. As we aged, his playing around settled down somewhat, but then other problems arose. Eric was serious at work, but not very good at it, so his career advancement was slower than others. As the children grew and needed school fees, Eric's salary alone couldn't afford their education. Mom, you should really tell Dad off more. He's not advancing in his job. He's always out drinking, and he's just too selfish. Even Stacy, who was a middle school student at the time, would say such things to Eric. However, I just laughed at those words. But, your dad goes to work seriously every day, without ever taking a dishonest day off. Sure, I wish he would get promoted, but that can't be helped. I can't say anything more than that. I made sure to remind our children not to forget their respect for their father. But middle schoolers are no longer little children. As they grew, they started to see the reality rather than the excuses I made. No matter how much I tried to cover for Eric, the children had already lost their patience with their father. However, he himself was unaware of this. I work for Aaron and Stacy, so make sure you study hard to show your gratitude. At home, Eric would drink in the evening and boast about being the breadwinner, bragging to Aaron and Stacy about how hard he works at his job. Moreover, he did not limit this to home, he also boasted at his company. He would tell his bosses and colleagues, unsolicited, that my children and wife respect me, and I work for my children's school fees. One day, out of the blue, Eric said this to me. This Sunday, 5 people from work are coming over to our house. Apparently, he had invited his boss, colleagues, and juniors to show off our happy family life. I was surprised by the sudden news. If 5 guests were coming, I needed to prepare a substantial amount of food. Of course, cleaning was necessary, but I also had to prepare guest dishes. It's this Sunday, he said so easily, but today was already Thursday night. And he should know that I have to drive Aaron to his club activities on Saturday. This is so sudden. And on Saturday, I blurted out. But Eric frowned at my words and said, "It's Aaron's transport, right?" I know. That's why I chose Sunday, as if he had no remorse. Does he think the house will clean itself and food will appear without effort? I was astonished, but since it was already promised, there was nothing I could do. All right, I understand. I'll manage somehow. From that day, I prepared late into the night to be ready for Sunday's hospitality. On Sunday, just before noon, 5 of Eric's colleagues arrived at our home as he had said. 2 were bosses, and 3 were colleagues and juniors from the same team. The youngest was a woman 7 years younger than Eric. Her name was Kelly Jones. Because she was the youngest, she offered to help me. Mrs. Hanson, may I use these plates? You don't need to call me Mrs. Hanson. Yes, feel free to use the plates. Perhaps because Eric and the bosses were discussing work, I had various conversations with her. Kelly, are you married? No. Actually, I just broke up with my boyfriend. We talked about personal things, and she really liked the pickles I made for the meal. Asking for the recipe. Mr. Hanson always brags about how delicious your cooking is. Kelly's words made me smile thinly. Surely Eric, who utters those words, is praising me, intoxicated with his role as a praising husband. However, Kelly, unaware of such things, took his words at face value and praised me. You have a wonderful husband, and Jenny, you are as lovely as I imagined. You two are the couple I admire. That's certainly not the case. However, I couldn't just shatter her dream. Without such illusions, marriage wouldn't be possible. Yes. Marriage is a good thing. Hopefully, you'll find a wonderful lover again someday. When you do, please introduce him to me. Of course. We talked about many things just on that day. Kelly told me I was like a sister to her. I was happy as if I had gained a sister. Since we exchanged contact information that day, Kelly and I have often met up. Of course, Eric knows about it. But I didn't become friends with her just to please Eric. Yet, as if he believes he is the center of the world. Eric told me, make sure to say good things about me, huh? Despite our age difference, Kelly and I became close friends. She even introduced me to a real boyfriend, and she cried in front of me when they broke up. Though we are nearly a generation apart, Kelly and I get along very well. And I truly hope she finds happiness. However, she has not been lucky in finding a good match, and she has turned 43. I am now 54 myself. Both of our children have graduated from college and left home. What has my life been about? I worked for the kids, the money got eaten up. And now I have to sacrifice myself to support an old woman who can't work. Eric started complaining like this on every occasion. While he used to say it was all for the kids. It seems he cannot truly appreciate the real happiness of the children having flown the nest. Since he was only putting on a show for himself. He probably feels dissatisfied because there is no visible return. I think he is truly pitiable. Even now, he puts on a good face outside, but at home, it's a different story. Does he think he's so great just because he works, or does he just want to be praised? I often say, I'm grateful, and it's not a lie, but I'm fed up with Eric's ingratitude. Honestly, now that the children are independent, I wonder if I have to stay with this man. But I can't discuss it with my elderly parents. And for Kelly, who wants to get married, it would seem like a luxurious problem. In the end, I kept these feelings to myself without telling anyone. It was a day as summer approached. My back pain worsened, and I finally decided to undergo surgery. The air quality had also deteriorated recently, worsening my asthma. Every cough sent sharp pains through my back. The back pain and asthma were dragging each other down, making daily life unbearable. So I finally opted for surgery. Well then, I'm off. On the day of my hospitalization, Eric didn't even see me off as I left the house with a big bag. I went straight to the hospital and completed the admission process alone. Later, the children came to visit. Aaron and Stacy listened carefully to the doctor's explanation about the surgery and the prognosis. I am truly grateful for that. The surgery, which required general anesthesia, took 3 hours but was successfully completed. I would need to stay in the hospital for about a month, during which Aaron and Stacy offered to take care of me during my hospitalization. Although it was a burden on the children, hospital life allowed me to rest both my body and mind quite comfortably compared to home. Yet, I still worry about Eric, despite him being such a husband. I wonder if your father is all right? He hasn't come at all. Could you check on him at home? I said this to Stacy, but she looked at me as if she were exasperated. Mom, you're too kind. Just leave him be. Still, he's not a child. He's managing fine. And if Dad gets really hungry and can't do anything about it, he'll surely come to the hospital, huh? Stacy said this with a laugh. Indeed, he's someone who can't do anything by himself. I could easily imagine what Stacy was describing. That's true. I responded to her words. About half a month into my hospital stay, while I was eating lunch, someone visited my hospital room. I put down my chopsticks at the sound of a knock. It was Eric. Oh, Dad. You came. Yeah, had some business. Eric said this, then chuckled through his nose as he looked at me on the bed. He pulled up a pipe chair with an air of importance and sat down heavily, then said to me, "You look just like a sick person." What? Oh, right. I am indeed sick. I laughed, thinking it was a joke, but Eric continued. Not working and sick, you're always going to be my burden, aren't you? What? That's why I've decided. I'm going to divorce a sick, poor person and live for myself and my new family from now on. Eric said what he wanted to say and stood up satisfied. Divorce? A new family? What do you mean? I was more confused than shocked, so I asked Eric again. She's pregnant. So, I've decided to marry her. That's why, please sign the divorce papers. Then, Eric took out a folded divorce paper from his back pocket, unfolded it, and handed it to me. Seeing the crumpled paper, I finally caught up with what was happening. But my irritation with Eric, who never considered my situation or feelings, continued to grow. All this time, I had endured without saying anything, even wanting a divorce. But to be discarded like this, he truly was a devil in disguise. I hadn't realized Eric was cheating, and how foolish I was to have worried about him. I understand. With a single word, I signed the divorce papers. I was furious, but strangely calm. The only good thing about you is your understanding. But as I suppressed my anger and filled out the divorce papers, that's what Eric said. After he left, tears started to flow from my eyes. But this was not out of sadness. It was the first time I had tears coming out of anger. A few days later, as usual, Stacy and Aaron came to see me at the hospital. And I told them about Eric's actions. Unbelievable. That old jerk. I agree with the divorce, but that's really the lowest of the low. Such a person isn't even human. It's embarrassing that our father is such a man. Both were more furious than I was, especially Stacy, who, like me previously, cried tears of anger. Anyway, Mom, don't worry about anything. Stacy and I are here for you. Thank you, Aaron said calmly, comforting me. But strangely, I wasn't sad. I was finally free from Eric. But the anger was different. I could never forgive this betrayal. After all, Eric only visited the hospital that one time. I faced my discharge day. After leaving the hospital, I would stay at Stacy's apartment, where she lives alone. I needed to go back home to pick up some stuff, so Aaron would drive me. Everything was settled, and just as Aaron was about to pick up my luggage, my phone rang. Oh, wait. It's a call. I was in an area where I could take calls, so I answered right there. The caller ID showed it was Kelly. Right, I needed to tell Kelly about the divorce. Thinking this, I answered the call. Hello? Ah, Jenny? I thought you might be getting discharged about now, so I called. Oh, that's right. I was discharged safely today. Thanks for calling. Kelly responded with a cheerful voice. I should be the one thanking you. Thank you for divorcing Eric. What? I was stunned by what I heard from Kelly on the other end. Why did she already know about it? And why was she thanking me for it? Had Kelly ever called my husband Eric before? All the questions flooding my mind were answered by Kelly's next words. From now on, leave Eric to me. The three of us, with the baby coming, will be happy. My hand holding the smartphone trembled. Aaron looked at me curiously, but I couldn't hide my anger. Even so, this is a public place. Without letting my anger explode, I muttered softly. Kelly. So you were the affair partner. An affair? Eric told me that his marriage with you had already failed, and that I'm practically his real wife. I don't want to hear those excuses. Let's all sit down and talk about this once. Why do we need that when it's over between you two? Anyway, I have to get back to work. Eric asked me to do something, and I'll contact you later. Kelly then hung up the phone. Aaron, who had overheard my phone call, stood there in disbelief. Of course, Aaron knew Kelly well since she had visited our house and even played with him. He must be shocked too. I can't forgive those two. That's just too low. Aaron, please take me to your father's workplace. Upon hearing this, Aaron looked surprised, but after understanding why, he nodded strongly. Right after being discharged, I had Aaron accompany me straight to Eric's place of work. When we parked the car in the visitors' parking at Eric's workplace, Aaron supported me. We entered the building and headed to the reception. I would like to speak with the president. The receptionist looked a bit troubled by my abrupt request and asked, Do you have an appointment? No, this is an unexpected visit. I'm sorry, but without an appointment. But it's important. The receptionist apologized, but I persisted. Perhaps overhearing our conversation, I felt the gaze of employees glancing over at us. Undoubtedly, we must seem like troublesome visitors who came without an appointment and demanded too much. In the midst of this, Eric noticed that Aaron and I were at his workplace. He got up hurriedly and approached us. What are you doing here? Hello, we came to talk to the president. To the president. Eric was clearly flustered, probably thinking I was about to expose his affair with his subordinate, Kelly. Calm down, let's go outside and talk. Saying this, he urged us to step outside. It's none of your business, Dad. Stay out of it. It is my business. Aaron resisted Eric's attempt to stop us, but Eric grabbed my arm, trying to forcefully remove us. Stop it. Mom just had surgery. Aaron managed to calm Eric down, and Eric reluctantly loosened his grip on my arm. Seeing our situation, Kelly watched and laughed triumphantly. Angrily, I shook off Eric's hand and said, So, I can't see the president? If that's the case, understood. We will no longer associate with your company. All transactions are to be stopped. Please relay that to the president. What? Eric stood there with his mouth agape. The receptionist looked worried and flustered. Seeing her discomfort, Aaron spoke up. Oh, I apologize for not mentioning earlier. But my mother is the CEO of Jenny Corporation. All the system-related matters here are handled by her company, so she should be able to explain. Hearing this, the receptionist hurriedly said, "Oh, I will check if the president has time. Please wait a moment." I didn't intend to make her feel uneasy, but I couldn't help it. More importantly, Eric stood next to me, his face pale with worry. "What are you talking about?" "The president." Yes, surprised now? I was appalled that he truly didn't know. Beside me, Aaron was laughing at Eric's reaction. I had started my own company before the children entered middle school. There was no way we could afford their school fees. Life was tough. Plus, I was unwell and couldn't go out to work. That's when I decided to work from home, believing that the era of the internet was coming. I first attended a 3-month free computer class hosted by the city. There, I met an elderly man who would later become my business partner, Robert. He had been a banker dealing with investments. He came to learn the basics of computers, because he believed that transactions would mostly move online in the future. But at the time of joining, he was already quite knowledgeable about computers. He helped me with my problems and even taught me some tricks. He was like a father figure to me. As we got to know each other, we would chat, and Robert asked me one day, "Jenny, why did you decide to learn about computers?" Actually, I confided in Robert as if seeking life advice. I told him that I couldn't send the kids to the schools they hoped for without making money from home. That's why I came here. Robert crossed his arms after hearing this. Honestly, earning enough for tuition from home is. I know. But I thought it's better than doing nothing. Robert smiled warmly after hearing my words. "If you'd like, I can introduce you to my son. He's a systems engineer and could teach you much more than what's available here. He's busy, so he might not have much time, though." Really? I would love to learn everything I can. True to his word, Robert introduced me to his son. I learned a lot from him, and during our sessions, he suggested that rather than just working from home, I should start a company. I had no confidence at first. However, a company wanted to try using a system that was based on advice from Robert's son. From then on, it was a cycle of studying and working every day. Of course, I could do all this from home without neglecting my household duties. Then, Robert invested the initial capital, and I established the company as the president. We didn't have an office, and all employees worked from home. Most of them were housewives. We introduced a flex-time system to ensure that everyone could work comfortably without stress. This method of working from home with flex-time was beneficial not only for mothers with young children who couldn't leave the house, but also advantageous for the company, because it meant someone was working 24 hours due to different working hours. Gradually, the company grew, hiring more employees and improving performance. Those whose children were older could study the systems more thoroughly and grow into engineers. And now, I am the president of a company that employs 900 people worldwide. Thanks to this, my children could advance their education without any financial difficulties. I never told Eric to avoid hurting his pride, but I earned all the tuition money. It was less than 3 minutes after the receptionist made the call when the president of Eric's company came rushing over. He greeted me politely. Ignoring a flustered Eric, Aaron and I were led to a meeting room. "My husband has been under your care, so I had been providing our company's system to you at a very low price. However, he is no longer related to me. I would like to return to the regular pricing." The president turned pale at my words. "Currently, we offer it at 20% of the standard rate. We'll just return it to 100%. If you're unable to pay, we'll have to discontinue our transactions." I smiled as the president groaned. "You were Eric's wife." "I had no idea, and I appreciate your past support. However, it's a bit difficult to adjust immediately after the divorce. Could we possibly have some time to consider this? I never intended to bring this up so suddenly. But Eric has had an affair with your employee, Kelly, and discarded me like a used rag. Naturally, I cannot feel sympathy for the company. Where these two individuals who disrupted my life met. What? Are you saying those two are in a relationship? The president's face turned even paler. He probably never imagined that there was infidelity within his company. It seems he is shocked to learn that Eric, who had always played the role of a good father and husband, was involved. That being said, if you wish to continue doing business, I would kindly ask you to renew the contract at the regular price. The president, understanding my feelings, could say nothing. He simply slumped his shoulders. As Aaron and I left the meeting room, there was Kelly. I can't believe Jenny runs a company. And to think you kept it from me. Your best friend, that's harsh. There was Kelly, making a sarcastic remark. Aaron was visibly angry, but I stopped him. I'm sorry. I didn't think it was worth mentioning. Even so, to use Eric against me as a weapon for harassment. I never thought you were that kind of person. But as a president, you must be okay, financially now, right? I'm relieved. I would have felt terrible if my actions had caused you to be unhappy. Her insincere words sounded like mockery. But she was wrong. Feeling obligated to correct her, I said, I'm sorry, but I don't think I've lost anything. In fact, thank you for taking him off my hands. You don't have to put up a brave front. It's not a front. A husband who has a spending habit hardly contributes to household expenses, looks down on others, treats his children as tools to show himself in a better light, doesn't participate in parenting, and doesn't provide for school fees. I was wondering if I had to stay with such a husband for the rest of my life. Kelly stood there with her mouth open. Aaron couldn't help but laugh. What? Who are you talking about? About Eric, of course. It seems he's been playing the role of a good husband and father outside. But it was me who paid for the children's college tuition. You better earn well for your baby's sake. Huh? I'm going to be a full-time housewife. Oh, is that so? It's unfortunate for the baby then. But I guess high school might be tough? Better start saving now. Kelly, unable to accept the truth about Eric, muttered in conflict and became flustered. Being pregnant, she probably wasn't emotionally stable. I felt sorry for confronting her with reality at such a time. But after all, she was the one who started the conflict, and I hadn't lied about anything. Well then, take care. I truly wish you happiness. I smiled warmly and left Kelly there, supported by Aaron as we left the company. My wish for her happiness contained neither lies nor sarcasm. I genuinely hoped that Kelly, my former best friend who so desperately wanted to be happy, would indeed find it. Whether she could find happiness with Eric, I didn't know. Eventually, the president apologized for any discomfort caused by his employee. No need for you, Mr. President, to apologize. It's not your fault, it's those two. But I no longer have a reason to offer discounts, so I simply proposed the regular price. The president responded, "You're right," and agreed to a new contract at the regular price. Although it may no longer concern you, Ms. Hansen. Eric Hansen has been given a pay cut for getting involved with a subordinate. He has a new family, but I hope he does not repeat the same mistake. The president informed me apologetically. I felt slightly relieved hearing about Eric's penalty. Despite his high salary, a pay cut would make life difficult. But my feelings of anger had vanished, replaced only by pity. Yes, I hope Mr. Hansen and Ms. Jones find happiness. The president smiled wryly in response. They have already been fighting. Kelly has returned to her parents' home and is on leave from work. Apparently, she's claiming she was tricked into a fraudulent marriage. Oh, it might just be her temporary anxiety due to pregnancy. I responded with a polite laugh. If so, that would be good, but whether they would find happiness together remained uncertain. I could easily imagine Kelly becoming a single mother and Eric becoming a poor, lonely old man. After that, I moved in with Stacy. Within a year, Stacy was engaged. I gifted her a duplex as a wedding present, and we started living together in the new house. With no need to think about Eric, I could focus more on my work. The company gradually began to generate significant profits, and I lived without financial worries, something that had once seemed impossible. Soon, I would become a grandmother. With more hope and happiness than fears for my retirement, I look forward to the future.